Introduction. In the annals of World War II, countless tales of courage and sacrifice emerged from the brutal crucible of conflict, yet few are as remarkable or as unjustly overlooked as that of the Night Witches. This was not a coven of mythical figures, but a regiment of young Soviet women, pilots and navigators, mechanics and ground crew, who defied every expectation and gender norm to take to the skies against the Nazi war machine. They flew antiquated biplanes made of plywood and canvas, aircraft so flimsy they were nicknamed flying coffins. They operated under the cloak of darkness, their engines throttled back to a near-silent whisper, striking terror into the hearts of German soldiers who, in their fear and superstition, dubbed them Nachthexen, Night Witches. This book will peel back the layers of myth and reveal the untold story of these extraordinary women. From the audacious vision of Marina Raskova, the famed aviator who fought to put women in combat, to the grueling training and the initial skepticism they faced from their male counterparts, we will delve into the formation of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. We will witness their baptism by fire, understanding how their seemingly crude equipment became their greatest asset, allowing them to execute daring night raids that earned them their fearsome reputation. Beyond the roar of engines and the dropping of bombs, this is a story of unbreakable sisterhood, forged in the freezing cockpits and under constant threat of enemy fire. It's a testament to resilience in the face of sexism, and a celebration of the unsung heroes, both in the air and on the ground, who kept the Night Witches flying. We will explore their pivotal missions, the heavy price of bravery they paid, and the complex legacy of recognition that often came too late. As the guns of war fell silent, many of these women returned to obscurity, their incredible contributions largely unacknowledged. But their story, one of unparalleled courage and defiance, refused to be silenced forever. It is a story that continues to inspire, reminding us that heroism knows no gender, and that even in the darkest hours, the human spirit can take flight against overwhelming odds. Chapter 1. Call to Wings. The summer of 1941 was a season of terror for the Soviet Union. Less than 2 years after signing the Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact, Adolf Hitler had unleashed Operation Barbarossa, a brutal and swift invasion that plunged the vast nation into the deadliest conflict in human history. The German war machine, honed by blitzkrieg victories across Europe, scythed through Soviet defences with terrifying efficiency. Cities burned, millions of soldiers were captured or killed, and the very existence of the Soviet state hung by a thread. Desperation permeated the air, thick and acrid like the smoke from 1,000 distant fires. In this crucible of existential threat, unconventional solutions, once unthinkable, began to surface. The Soviet Union, unlike its Western counterparts, had a history of integrating women into certain professional spheres, including aviation. Female parachutists, record-breaking long-distance flyers and celebrated aviators were already part of the national consciousness, often celebrated as symbols of Soviet modernity and strength. Yet, combat roles, particularly in the skies, remained firmly and universally a male domain. It was against this backdrop of national catastrophe that a bold, almost revolutionary proposal found its way to the highest echelons of power. The idea did not originate from a military strategist poring over maps, but from a woman whose name already resonated across the Soviet Union, Marina Raskova. Raskova was no ordinary pilot. She was a national hero, one of the most celebrated aviators of her time. In 1938, she had gained international fame as the navigator on a record-breaking non-stop flight from Moscow to the Far East, a feat of endurance and skill that captivated the world. Her image adorned propaganda posters, her name synonymous with Soviet ambition and prowess in the air. More than just a skilled flyer, Raskova possessed an unyielding determination and a deep-seated patriotism that burned fiercely in the face of the German invasion. As the war intensified, Raskova was inundated with letters from women across the country. They were factory workers, students, farmers, women from every walk of life, all sharing a common plea to fight. They demanded to be allowed into combat, not just in support roles but on the front lines, to defend their homeland. These pleas resonated deeply with Raskova, who understood the untapped potential and fierce resolve within these women. She saw not just a surge of patriotic fervour, but a desperate, pragmatic solution to the Soviet Union's dwindling manpower and overwhelming need for trained personnel. Raskova began to relentlessly lobby the State Defense Committee, the supreme governing body during the war, headed by none other than Joseph Stalin himself. Her arguments were compelling. Women were already demonstrating their capabilities in various war industries, and their dedication was undeniable. The nation needed every able body, and women, with proper training, could undoubtedly contribute to the aerial war effort. She argued that dismissing them based on gender was a luxury the Soviet Union could no longer afford. The prevailing attitudes within the Red Army High Command were, predictably, steeped in ingrained sexism. The idea of women in combat, especially in the prestigious and dangerous role of military pilots, was met with skepticism, derision, and outright resistance. Flying was considered too physically demanding, too emotionally taxing, too unfeminine. But Raskova persisted, armed with the passionate pleas of thousands of women and her own formidable reputation. She presented detailed proposals, outlining how these units could be organized, trained, and deployed. The decision ultimately rested with Stalin. The dictator, known for his ruthless pragmatism and willingness to defy convention when it served his strategic interests, was facing an unprecedented crisis. His armies were reeling, and the industrial heartland was threatened. Every resource, every potential soldier had to be considered. While he might have harbored his own reservations about women in combat, the sheer desperation of the war, coupled with Raskova's relentless advocacy and the overwhelming public demand, pushed him towards a historic decision. On October 8, 1941, by decree of the People's Commissariat of Defense, Joseph Stalin approved the formation of 3 all-female aviation regiments: the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment, the 587th Bomber Aviation Regiment, and the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. This was an unprecedented move, a radical departure from military tradition not just in the Soviet Union, but across the globe. The call to wings had been answered. From a position of profound national weakness, Stalin's decree shattered a centuries-old barrier, opening the skies to women who yearned to fight. It changed history, not just for the Soviet Union, but for the future of women in militaries worldwide. For the young women who would soon flock to the recruitment centers, it was the chance they had desperately awaited, an opportunity to defend their homeland, to prove their worth, and to take flight against the encroaching darkness. Among them were the future Night Witches, their legend yet to be forged in the fire and fear of the Eastern Front. Chapter 2. Marina Raskova's mission. Before the grim realities of total war consumed the Soviet Union, Marina Mikhailovna Raskova was a household name, a symbol of the new Soviet woman, capable, heroic, and unyielding. Born in 1912, her early life gave little indication of the path she would forge. A talented musician, she initially pursued a career in chemistry before her fascination with aviation took hold. By 1932, she was a navigator at the Zhukovsky Air Force Academy, breaking barriers in a field overwhelmingly dominated by men. Raskova's ascent was meteoric. She quickly earned her pilot's license, but it was her navigation skills that truly set her apart. She became the first female military navigator in the Soviet Air Force, a testament not only to her innate talent, but also to the Soviet Union's, then unique, compared to Western nations, embrace of women in various professional, even technical, roles. Her true fame, however, was cemented in a series of highly publicized long-distance flights. The most famous was the Rodina Motherland flight in September 1938, where, as navigator alongside pilots Valentina Grisodubova and Polina Osipenko, she flew a Tupolev ANT-37 from Moscow to the Far East. The journey was fraught with peril, including a forced landing in the Taiga that saw Raskova parachute out and trek through the wilderness for 10 days before being rescued. Upon their return, all 3 women were declared heroes of the Soviet Union, the highest honorary title in the USSR, becoming the first women to receive this esteemed award. This pre-war celebrity positioned Raskova uniquely when the war began. She wasn't just an accomplished aviator, she was a national icon, a living embodiment of Soviet perseverance and capability. This public standing, combined with her deep connections within the aviation and military hierarchy, made her the perfect, indeed the only, figure to champion the cause of women in combat aviation. As German forces pushed deeper into Soviet territory in the agonizing summer and autumn of 1941, the desperation grew. The male population was being decimated on the front lines, and the industrial base was being systematically dismantled or evacuated. Yet, across the vast Soviet Union, a surging tide of patriotism animated women who were eager to contribute directly to the war effort. They were not content to merely work in factories or serve as nurses, they wanted to fight. Their impassioned letters, sometimes thousands a day, flooded government offices, party headquarters, and even Raskova's own doorstep. Raskova listened. She understood. More than anyone, she grasped the fierce determination simmering beneath these countless appeals. She saw not just raw emotion, but a massive, untapped resource of human capital and courage. For Raskova, it was a matter of both principle and pragmatism. Principle, because she believed unequivocally in women's capabilities. Pragmatism, because the motherland was bleeding, and every pair of hands, every capable mind was needed. Her mission began with intense lobbying. She approached officials within the People's Commissariat of Defense, military leaders, and even members of the Politburo. The initial responses were largely dismissive. Military tradition, deeply entrenched and globally consistent, held that combat was the exclusive domain of men. Arguments ranged from concerns about physical strength and emotional resilience to outright sexist dismissals of women's suitability for the rigors of aerial warfare. "Women belong on the ground" was a common refrain, supporting the men, not flying dangerous combat missions. But Marina Raskova was not easily deterred. Her celebrity status granted her an audience that others might not have received, and her unyielding resolve was matched only by her logical arguments. She articulated a vision not just of individual heroism, but of entire combat units, fully trained and deployed. She argued that the existing pool of male pilots was insufficient to meet the demands of the escalating air war. She pointed to the numerous female pilots already in civilian aviation, many of whom possess significant flying experience. She presented a meticulously detailed plan for recruitment, training, and unit formation. Crucially, Raskova framed her proposal not merely as an act of gender equality, but as a vital strategic necessity for the survival of the Soviet Union. She presented the passionate pleas of thousands of women as evidence of a national will to fight, a will that would be squandered if ignored. Her relentless campaign finally reached the highest authority, Joseph Stalin. While the dictator was famously inscrutable and unpredictable, he was above all a pragmatist. As the German invasion continued to inflict devastating losses, Stalin became increasingly open to radical measures. He recognized the immense propaganda value of showcasing women in combat roles, not just domestically to bolster morale, but also internationally to demonstrate the Soviet Union's total commitment to the war. More importantly, he recognized the sheer necessity of maximizing every available human resource. And so, on October 8, 1941, the historic decree was signed. It was a victory not just for Marina Raskova, but for every woman who had dared to dream of taking to the skies in defense of their homeland. The decree authorized the formation of 3 women's aviation regiments: a fighter regiment, the 586th, a dive bomber regiment, the 587th, and a night bomber regiment, the 588th. Raskova herself was appointed commander of the 122nd Aviation Group, responsible for overseeing the initial training and deployment of all 3 regiments, before eventually leading the 587th. Raskova's mission was accomplished. She had faced down entrenched prejudice and military conservatism, leveraging her fame and relentless determination to open the cockpit doors for thousands of Soviet women. Her vision transformed the pleas of patriotic citizens into a tangible, powerful force that would soon haunt the night skies over the Eastern Front. The call to wings had sounded, and thanks to Marina Raskova, women were finally cleared for takeoff. Chapter 3. The formation of the 588th. With Stalin's decree signed, the floodgates opened. Recruitment posters, some featuring Marina Raskova herself, quickly appeared across the Soviet Union, appealing to women to volunteer for the newly formed aviation regiments. The response was overwhelming. From every corner of the vast nation, young women, some still teenagers, others in their 20s, left their jobs, their studies, and their families to answer the call. They came from diverse backgrounds: university students, factory workers, teachers, even former athletes. What united them was a burning patriotism and an unshakable desire to actively participate in the defense of their homeland. Thousands applied, far exceeding the initial capacity of the regiments. The selection process, rigorous by any standard, was intensified by the unique circumstances. Volunteers had to be physically fit, mentally resilient, and possess a strong educational background, particularly in mathematics and physics, crucial for navigation and aviation principles. While some already had experience from civilian flying clubs, DOSAAF, the Voluntary Society for Assistance to the Army, Air Force and Navy, had trained many pre-war. The majority were novices when it came to military aviation. Those selected were immediately dispatched to Engels, a small city on the Volga River, a safe distance from the front lines. Here, at Engels Military Aviation School, the 122nd Aviation Group, under Marina Raskova's direct command, began the monumental task of transforming raw recruits into combat pilots and navigators. It was a stark and often brutal transition. The training was condensed and accelerated, designed to prepare them for combat in a fraction of the time normally allotted to male pilots. Life at Engels was Spartan. The women lived in primitive barracks, often enduring bitter cold and meagre rations, a foretaste of the hardships awaiting them at the front. Discipline was strict, mirroring military academies everywhere. Réveil before dawn, grueling physical training, and endless hours of theoretical instruction filled their days. They studied aerodynamics, meteorology, engine mechanics, navigation, and bombing theory. Every spare moment was dedicated to learning the intricacies of military flying. A significant hurdle, beyond the technical challenges, was the pervasive skepticism that greeted their arrival. Male instructors, officers, and even some enlisted men openly doubted the wisdom of putting women in combat. Whispers and outright remarks questioned their courage, their emotional stability, and their ability to withstand the pressures of war. "Women belong in the kitchen," was a sentiment frequently, if not always audibly, expressed. This deeply ingrained sexism created an atmosphere where the women felt they constantly had to prove themselves, not just to the enemy, but to their own comrades. Marina Raskova, ever their staunch advocate, worked tirelessly to counter these attitudes, but the burden of proof ultimately fell on the women themselves. Among the 3 regiments forming at Engels, the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment stood out. While the 586th trained on Yak-1 fighters and the 587th on the more modern P-2 dive bombers, the 588th was assigned a Polikarpov PO-2 biplane. This choice was met with a mixture of bewilderment and dismay. The PO-2 was, to put it mildly, an anachronism. Designed in 1928 as a primary trainer and crop duster, it was essentially a wooden frame covered in fabric, with 2 open cockpits and a top speed of just 94 miles per hour. It had no defensive armament, no radio, and no parachute storage for the pilots, though navigators often carried one. Its landing gear was fixed, and its instruments were rudimentary at best. In an age of rapidly advancing aviation technology, the PO-2 was a relic. Yet there was a peculiar genius in this seemingly backward choice, one that would become the cornerstone of the 588th's terrifying effectiveness. The PO-2's slow speed, far from being a handicap, made it difficult for faster German night fighters to intercept, often causing them to overshoot. Its wooden and fabric construction meant it had a very low radar signature. Indeed, radar was still primitive, making it almost invisible to early detection systems. Most crucially, its quiet M11 engine, when throttled back, made little more than a whispering rustle, especially when approaching targets at low altitude. The commander chosen for the 588th was Major Yevdokia Bershenskaya, a veteran civilian pilot with over a decade of flying experience. She was known for her calm demeanor, strict discipline, and unwavering belief in her pilots. Under her leadership, the women of the 588th began to embrace the quirks of their flying coffins. They learned to navigate by map and compass, to rely on dead reckoning and the stars, and to operate in complete darkness, often without the aid of ground lights. They practiced formation, flying so close that their wingtips almost touched, a vital skill for precision bombing in the black of night. The training was relentless. They endured mock bombing runs, simulated enemy fire, and endless drills to perfect their takeoffs and landings in the dark. They learned to load bombs by hand, a back-breaking task, and to identify targets through moonlight or flares. Every woman, whether pilot or navigator, also trained as a mechanic, learning to fix their own aircraft under duress, a crucial skill given the frontline conditions they would soon face. By December 1941, the first groups of the 588th were declared combat ready, a remarkable feat given the accelerated training schedule and the initial lack of experience among many recruits. They were not yet the Night Witches, that terrifying moniker still lay in the future, earned through their actions. They were simply a group of determined young women, under-equipped but fiercely motivated, about to embark on a journey that would defy expectations, rewrite history, and terrorize the enemy under the shroud of the darkest nights. The beginnings of the Night Witches Regiment had been laid, ready to take flight into a war-torn sky. Chapter 4. Baptism by Fire. The cold of the Engels training facility was nothing compared to the biting winds of the front. In May 1942, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, now fully formed under the command of Major Yevdokia Bershenskaya, received their orders. They were to deploy to the southern front, specifically to the areas around the Mias River and the Donbass region, where fierce fighting raged. Their mission: night harassment bombing and precision strikes on German positions. Their arrival at the makeshift airfields near the front was met with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and, in some cases, outright amusement from the seasoned and overwhelmingly male air and ground crews. The sight of young women, some barely out of their teens, preparing to fly flimsy biplanes into combat seemed ludicrous to many. "Are these truly our reinforcements?" they might have muttered, eyeing the fabric-covered Po-2s with unconcealed disdain. The women were keenly aware of these unspoken judgments, adding another layer of pressure to their already daunting task. They knew that only their performance in combat could silence the doubters. Their airfields were often little more than flattened fields, sometimes a freshly mowed collective farm with primitive dugouts for shelter. There were no hangars. The Po-2s were simply staked down in the open. Maintenance was conducted under the stars, often by the pilots and navigators themselves, their hands stiff with cold or slick with oil. Spare parts were scarce, and fuel often had to be siphoned from other units. The first missions were a brutal introduction to the realities of aerial warfare. The PO-2, with its open cockpits, offered no protection from the elements. Pilots and navigators huddled in their thin leather flight helmets and coats, often battling temperatures well below freezing, even in late spring. The wind screamed through the biplane's rigging, a constant, deafening roar that made communication difficult and amplified the chilling cold. Frostbite was a constant threat, numbing fingers on controls and blurring vision. Their crude equipment was both a curse and, as they would soon discover, a perverse blessing. The PO-2 carried a relatively small bomb load, typically 2 to 6 bombs, each ranging from 50 kilograms to 250 kilograms, often loaded by hand onto racks under the wings. There were no bomb sights. Instead, navigators relied on their finely tuned instincts, a stopwatch, and a rudimentary aiming device, often a simple crosshair, to release bombs with accuracy. Precision bombing was a delicate dance between pilot and navigator, requiring perfect timing and coordination. The planes had no radios. This meant no communication with ground control, no warnings about approaching enemy fighters, and no way to coordinate with other planes in the air once they took off. Missions were planned meticulously on the ground, and pilots relied on prearranged signals, flares, or simply their own courage and cunning to navigate the vast, hostile darkness. There were no parachutes for the pilots, a grim reality of resource scarcity and the plane's design. A PO-2 would often disintegrate if hit by anti-aircraft fire, leaving little chance for escape even with a parachute. Navigators sometimes carried them, offering a slim hope if their pilot was still alive and could guide the crippled plane to a safe bailout altitude. Their primary targets were German strongpoints, troop concentrations, supply depots, artillery positions, and airfields. The element of surprise was their greatest weapon. They would fly in waves, often in groups of 3, approaching their targets at extremely low altitudes to avoid detection. As they neared, the pilot would cut the engine, allowing the PO-2 to glide silently, or nearly silently, over the target. This unique tactic was terrifyingly effective. The Germans would hear only a faint whoosh, the whisper of cloth wings through the night air, before the bombs began to fall seemingly from nowhere. This ghostly approach, combined with the psychological impact of being struck in the dead of night by an unseen enemy, quickly earned them their chilling moniker. Enemy fire was an ever-present danger. German anti-aircraft guns, though often primitive themselves, would light up the night sky with tracer rounds, creating deadly webs of fire. German searchlights would sweep the darkness, trying to pin the slow-moving PO-2s in their blinding beams, making them easy targets for ground fire or the rare, faster night fighter. Early on, German pilots often found it frustratingly difficult to engage the PO-2s. Their biplanes were so slow that the faster Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs would simply overshoot them, sometimes stalling out themselves in frustration. The first casualties were swift and brutal. Planes, often riddled with holes, sometimes didn't return. The women learned to live with constant fear, the gnawing anxiety before each mission, and the numbing grief after losing a comrade. But with each successful bombing run, with each flicker of fear they saw in the eyes of captured German soldiers, their confidence grew. They were proving, under the most trying circumstances, that they were not just women, but skilled, courageous combat aviators. Their baptism by fire forged them into a formidable, albeit unlikely, fighting force. The skeptics began to fall silent, replaced by a grudging respect, for the Night Witches were now truly unleashed upon the enemy. Chapter 5. The Flying Coffins. The Polikarpov PO-2, affectionately known as the kukuruznik, crop duster, due to its original agricultural purpose, was an unlikely weapon of war. By 1942, when the 588th Night Bomber Regiment deployed to the front, the world of aviation had moved on to sleek, all-metal monoplanes, powerful engines, and advanced weaponry. The PO-2, a biplane constructed primarily of wood and canvas, with an open cockpit and a top speed that struggled to break 100 miles per hour, appeared to be an embarrassing relic. To the uninitiated, assigning these outdated aircraft to a combat regiment seemed like a cruel joke, or worse, a death sentence. Indeed, the pilots themselves often referred to them grimly as flying coffins, yet it was precisely these anachronistic qualities that, paradoxically, transformed the PO-2 into a uniquely terrifying and effective instrument of war in the hands of the Night Witches. Firstly, the PO-2's construction was its stealthiest asset. Made almost entirely of wood and fabric, with minimal metal components, it had an incredibly low radar signature. In the early 1940s, radar technology was still in its infancy, often clunky and unreliable. The German radar systems of the time struggled to pick up the Po-2s, which absorbed radar waves rather than reflecting them. This made the biplanes virtually invisible to the electronic eyes of the enemy, allowing them to approach targets undetected until it was often too late. Secondly, its incredibly slow speed, which was widely mocked, became a significant tactical advantage. Faster German fighter planes like the Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s were simply too fast to effectively engage the Po-2. A fighter pilot attempting to intercept a Po-2 would often have to slow down so drastically that their own aircraft would stall or lose control, putting them at risk. More often, they would simply overshoot the lumbering biplane, giving the Po-2 pilot precious seconds to evade or continue their bombing run. This bizarre mismatch in speed turned the hunters into the hunted, frustrating German pilots to no end. Some German aces even complained that trying to shoot down a Po-2 was more dangerous to themselves than to the target. The engine, a Shvetsov M11 5-cylinder radial engine, produced a modest 100 to 125 horsepower. When approaching a target, the pilot would throttle back the engine, sometimes cutting it entirely to glide in silently. The soft whoosh of the fabric wings slicing through the night air was often the only warning the Germans received before bombs began to fall. This eerie, ghostly sound, combined with the unseen nature of the attacker, contributed heavily to the psychological terror the Night Witches inflicted. German soldiers would recount hearing only the whisper of the wind before the explosions, leading to the chilling Nachthexen moniker. The Po-2's open cockpits, while exposing the pilots to the freezing cold and enemy fire, also offered unparalleled visibility. Pilots and navigators had an unobstructed view of the ground, crucial for low-altitude navigation and target identification in the dark, where instruments were minimal. Without radios, communication between aircraft was often done through hand signals or pre-arranged light signals, requiring precise formation flying that the nimble Po-2 was capable of at low speeds. Furthermore, the Po-2's rugged simplicity made it incredibly durable and easy to maintain in primitive conditions. Unlike complex metal aircraft that required specialized tools and parts, a damaged Po-2 could often be repaired with basic materials, wood, fabric and glue by the ground crews, many of whom were also women. This meant that even heavily damaged planes could be quickly patched up and returned to service, allowing the regiment to maintain a high operational tempo, sometimes flying more than a dozen sorties per night. The design also facilitated their unique bombing methods. With bombs mounted externally, often manually loaded, the process was quick. Without sophisticated bomb sights, the navigators became masters of precision, relying on dead reckoning, moonlight, and their acute understanding of wind and altitude to accurately drop their small but psychologically devastating payloads. A single bomb, even a small one, dropped onto a German tent or a sleeping barracks from out of the unseen darkness, could cause panic and chaos disproportionate to its explosive power. Thus, the flying coffins became instruments of terror. Their antiquated nature, far from being a weakness, was their greatest strength. The Po-2 allowed the Night Witches to exploit the gaps in German defences, turning their perceived vulnerability into an unparalleled advantage. They flew slower than the speed of fear, more silently than a whispered prayer, delivering not just explosives, but a relentless psychological assault that wore down the enemy's nerves night after night. The irony was profound. The most outdated aircraft in the Soviet inventory became one of the most effective, precisely because it was so utterly out of step with conventional aerial warfare. Chapter 6. The Witching Hour Attacks. The fear began subtly, a ripple of unease spreading through German forward positions. It started with reports of inexplicable explosions in the dead of night, followed by the chilling realization that no sirens had wailed, no heavy bombers had roared overhead, no fighter planes had been detected. Only a faint, almost imperceptible whoosh, or a low, distant hum, swallowed by the vastness of the Eastern Front night, preceded the sudden bursts of flame and shrapnel. Then came the chilling discovery of the aircraft responsible, flimsy, fabric-covered biplanes, so slow they seemed to defy gravity, piloted by unseen adversaries. It wasn't long before the German soldiers coined their own term for these nocturnal tormentors, Nachthexen, or Night Witches. The name, born of superstition and terror, was a testament to the unique tactics employed by the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. Their raids were not about overwhelming firepower, they were about relentless harassment, psychological warfare, and surgical strikes that shattered morale as much as they destroyed targets. The witching hour attacks typically commenced just after dusk, and often continued until the first hint of dawn. The Night Witches operated in waves, rarely flying more than 3 planes together. This dispersal made them harder to track, and allowed for a continuous, maddening assault. A typical tactic involved 3 Po-2s approaching a target. 2 would act as decoys, drawing anti-aircraft fire and searchlights with their noisy engines. As German defences focused on these bait planes, the third pilot would throttle back her engine to idle, or even cut it entirely, allowing the Po-2 to glide silently over the target at an extremely low altitude. The silence was the most terrifying aspect. The only sound would be the soft rustle of wind through the biplane's fabric wings, a sound that German soldiers often likened to a witch's broomstick sweeping through the air. In the darkness, the only indication of their presence might be the sudden appearance of flares dropped by the navigators, momentarily illuminating their target before the bombs followed, seemingly from nowhere. These weren't heavy carpet-bombing raids. The Po-2s could only carry a small payload, typically between 150 to 300 kilograms, 330 to 660 pounds, of bombs, which often included smaller fragmentation or incendiary devices. But their precision, combined with the psychological shock, made them devastatingly effective. A single bomb dropped directly onto a supply dump could ignite a massive fire. A well-placed explosive could demolish a command post or shatter an artillery gun. Their favourite targets included fuel depots, ammunition dumps, troop barracks, railway junctions and headquarters. The psychological impact on the German troops was immense. Sleep deprivation became a critical factor. Just as soldiers would drift off to sleep, another whoosh, an explosion would jar them awake. This ceaseless nocturnal torment frayed nerves, degraded performance, and chipped away at morale. The inability to effectively retaliate compounded the frustration. German anti-aircraft gunners, already struggling to hit the slow, erratic Po-2s, found themselves wasting precious ammunition on phantom targets. Faster German night fighters, as noted, found themselves in a bizarre predicament, often overshooting the biplanes or stalling out in their attempts to slow down enough for a shot. The pilots of the 588th became adept at evasive maneuvers, banking sharply, diving and climbing erratically the moment a searchlight beam locked onto them. The Night Witch's dedication was legendary. On a single night, a pilot and navigator might fly multiple sorties, sometimes as many as 8 to 18. Landing briefly to refuel, reload bombs, often by hand, and receive new target coordinates, they would take off again, plunging back into the dark, hostile skies. The sheer volume of their raids, combined with their accuracy and the psychological element of surprise, made them a constant, infuriating menace. Stories of their exploits spread rapidly among both Soviet and German troops. For the Soviets, they were heroes, their courage a source of inspiration. For the Germans, they were a source of profound dread and superstition. A bounty was reportedly placed on any Night Witch shot down, and German pilots who managed to intercept one were awarded the prestigious Iron Cross. Yet, despite these efforts, the ghostly whoosh continued to haunt the German lines night after night. The witching hour attacks transformed the unassuming Po-2 and its determined female crews into one of the most effective, and certainly most feared, harassment units on the Eastern Front. They didn't win battles on their own, but they chipped away at the enemy's will, denied them rest, and disrupted their operations with a relentless, terrifying precision. The name Night Witches, intended as an insult, became a badge of honour, a chilling testament to the effectiveness of these extraordinary women who owned the night sky. Chapter 7. Fear in the Fog. The terror inflicted by the Night Witches wasn't merely a product of their bombs. It was a deeply psychological dread, a persistent, gnawing anxiety that seeped into the very fabric of German military life on the Eastern Front. It was a fear born of the unknown, of an enemy that struck unseen and unheard, leaving only destruction and shattered nerves in its wake. This fear permeated the German ranks, from the weary foot soldier huddled in his dugout to the frustrated Luftwaffe pilot scrambling into his advanced fighter. For the ordinary German soldier, the whisper of cloth wings became the sound of impending doom. Unlike the roaring approach of a conventional bomber, which provided at least a few minutes of warning, the Po-2s arrived with an almost supernatural stealth. The pilot's technique of cutting the engine and gliding silently towards the target meant that the first sign of their presence was often the eerie, soft rustle of wind through the biplane's fabric, followed almost immediately by the whistle of falling bombs, and then the explosion. This lack of warning, this sudden violence out of the vast black void, was profoundly unnerving. Imagine a German artillery crew, exhausted after a day of fierce fighting, finally settling down for a few hours of uneasy sleep. Suddenly, a faint, unfamiliar sound, like a broomstick sweeping through the air or a phantom whisper, brushes over their camp. Before they can fully register it, bombs explode, showering them with earth and shrapnel. Chaos erupts. Orders are shouted, men scramble for cover, but the attacker is already gone, swallowed by the darkness. This scenario replayed itself, night after night, unit after unit, across vast stretches of the front. The cumulative effect of these relentless attacks was severe sleep deprivation. German troops found it increasingly difficult to get uninterrupted rest. Just as they might drift off, the distant, then unnervingly close, whisper would herald another raid. This constant interruption frayed nerves, led to irritability, decreased concentration, and contributed to combat fatigue. A soldier deprived of sleep makes mistakes. A unit of sleep-deprived soldiers performs poorly, reacts slowly, and makes critical errors in judgment. Frustration mounted within the German Luftwaffe. Their highly advanced fighter planes, designed for speed and aerial dogfights, were ill-suited for hunting the slow-moving, low-flying Po-2s. Attempts to intercept them often ended in failure, with Messerschmitts overshooting their targets or even stalling as pilots desperately tried to match the Po-2's leisurely pace. This inability to effectively counter the Night Witches was a source of profound embarrassment and rage for German airmen, who prided themselves on their aerial superiority. Some German pilots even described the experience as trying to swat a mosquito with a sledgehammer, inefficient and infuriating. The searchlights, designed to illuminate and fix enemy aircraft for anti-aircraft guns, found little purchase on the elusive Po-2s. The small, dark biplanes, flying at treetop level or barely above, often managed to slip through the beams. When caught, the Night Witches would execute sharp, unpredictable turns, dives and climbs, often breaking free before anti-aircraft batteries could zero in. The night sky would be lit up by frantic bursts of tracer fire, but often, the only result was wasted ammunition and further frustration. The legend of the Nachthexen spread rapidly through the German ranks, morphing from a simple nickname into a pervasive myth. Stories proliferated about these spectral women, almost invisible in the dark, flying their silent machines and dropping bombs with chilling precision. The psychological impact was so great that German commanders reportedly promised Iron Crosses to any pilot who managed to shoot down one of the Nachthexen, a testament to how seriously they viewed the threat. The bounty, however, did little to stem the tide of nightly torment. The fear in the fog was a silent, insidious weapon, wielded masterfully by the Night Witches. They didn't engage in grand aerial battles, nor did they unleash overwhelming destruction. Instead, they waged a war of attrition on German nerves, disrupting supply lines, damaging infrastructure, and, most importantly, denying the enemy rest and peace. The chilling whisper of cloth wings became a harbinger of dread, a constant reminder that even in the deepest darkness, the Soviet women were watching, waiting, and ready to strike again. Chapter 8. Tactics in the Shadows. The Po-2 biplane, for all its perceived drawbacks, was a remarkably versatile platform in the hands of the Night Witches, allowing them to develop and refine a set of unique tactics perfectly suited for their nocturnal harassment missions. These tactics in the shadows compensated for their technological deficiencies with ingenuity, audacity, and an unwavering commitment to their objectives. The cornerstone of their approach was stealth. The Po-2's fabric and wood construction rendered it virtually invisible to early radar systems. Its slow speed, though seemingly a disadvantage, made it difficult for German night fighters to engage effectively. But the ultimate stealth weapon was the engine. As they approached a target, often flying at dangerously low altitudes, sometimes just a few hundred feet, the pilot would throttle back the M11 engine, or cut it entirely. The plane would then glide silently through the last stretch of air before reaching the target. This stealth drop was the secret behind the terrifying whoosh that heralded their arrival, giving German soldiers virtually no warning before the bombs impacted. Bomb runs were executed with astonishing precision, given the rudimentary equipment. There were no sophisticated Norden bomb sights here. Navigators, often leaning out of the open cockpit, would use simple aiming devices, sometimes just a primitive crosshair and a stopwatch, to calculate the precise moment of bomb release. They relied on dead reckoning, extensive pre-flight mapping, and an intimate knowledge of the terrain acquired through endless reconnaissance flights. Moonlight, starlight, or flares dropped by the lead aircraft were their only illumination. The bombardier and pilot worked in tandem, a silent, symbiotic dance in the darkness, where precise timing and coordination were paramount. A single missed beat could send bombs off target, wasting precious resources and risking their lives for naught. The small bomb load of the Po-2, typically just 2 to 6 bombs, meant that each bomb run had to be strategically effective. Rather than indiscriminate area bombing, the Night Witches focused on precision strikes against high-value targets. Fuel and ammunition depots, artillery positions, troop concentrations, headquarters buildings, and railway junctions. A small bomb dropped directly onto a barracks could cause immense panic and disrupt sleep for hundreds. A well-aimed incendiary could ignite a massive fuel dump, creating a spectacle that demoralized the enemy for miles around. One of their most effective tactical innovations involved multiple aircraft coordination. While a single Po-2 might fly alone, more often they would operate in groups of 2 or 3. A common tactic was for 2 planes to fly ahead, acting as decoys. These bait aircraft would deliberately draw anti-aircraft fire, turning sharply, diving and climbing to evade the tracer rounds and searchlight beams. While the Germans were preoccupied with these targets, the 3rd PO2 would cut its engine and glide silently into position, delivering its bombs with devastating surprise. This coordinated effort maximized their effectiveness and minimized their losses. A critical aspect of their operations was flying without radios. This meant no communication with ground control, no air traffic control guidance, and no ability to coordinate in real time with other aircraft in the air. All mission parameters were meticulously planned on the ground beforehand. Pilots and navigators memorized routes, targets, and contingencies. In the air, they relied on visual signals, pre-arranged light patterns, and an uncanny sense of spatial awareness to maintain formation and execute their missions. This reliance on non-verbal communication underscored the intense training and profound trust within the crews. Equally harrowing was the reality of flying without parachutes for the pilots. While navigators sometimes carried them, if available, the pilots of the Po-2 were largely without this last resort. The aircraft's wooden and fabric construction meant that if hit by anti-aircraft fire, it often disintegrated in a fiery crash, leaving no chance for escape. This grim reality underscored the immense courage and fatalistic determination required for every sortie. Each flight was a gamble with death, a test of nerves against the chilling prospect of a fiery end. These tactics, born of necessity and refined through brutal experience, transformed the flying coffins into an airborne nightmare for the Wehrmacht. The Night Witches became masters of stealth and surprise, turning their technological limitations into tactical advantages. Their whisper in the shadows, followed by the sudden, unseen explosion, cemented their infamous reputation and etched their daring tactics into the annals of aerial warfare. Chapter 9. Sisterhood of the Sky. The shared crucible of combat forges bonds unlike any other, but for the women of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, the intensity was amplified by their unique circumstances. Isolated by gender from the broader male military, bound by the constant threat of death, and united by a common mission to prove their worth, they formed a sisterhood of the sky that became the bedrock of their survival and success. From the moment they arrived at Engels, skepticism and prejudice from male comrades, and even some instructors, forced them to lean on one another. They were a collective anomaly, perceived by many as an experiment that was doomed to fail. This external pressure only intensified their internal cohesion. They quickly realized that their strength lay in their unity. Every woman in the regiment, whether a pilot, navigator, mechanic, or armourer, understood that their individual survival and the regiment's effectiveness depended on the collective. Life on the front lines was brutal. They often lived in rudimentary dugouts or tents, enduring bitter cold in winter and sweltering heat in summer. Rations were meagre, sleep was constantly interrupted by alerts or missions, and hygiene was a luxury. In these harsh conditions, personal differences melted away, replaced by a profound sense of camaraderie. They shared their last pieces of bread, mended each other's tattered uniforms, and offered comfort during moments of despair or fear. Laughter, songs, and even shared tears became vital coping mechanisms against the relentless strain of war. The relationship between pilot and navigator was particularly deep, built on absolute trust. In the open cockpits of the Po-2, with no radio communication, their lives were literally in each other's hands. The pilot relied entirely on the navigator's precise calculations and keen eyes to guide them through the treacherous night. The navigator trusted the pilot's skill and courage to execute evasive maneuvers under fire and bring them safely home. They were inseparable pairs, often living together in the same dugout, eating together, and preparing for missions side by side. The loss of a navigator was akin to losing a limb for a pilot, and vice versa, leaving an emotional wound that rarely healed. Major Yevdokia Bershanskaya, the regiment's commander, fostered this sense of unity. She understood the unique challenges her women faced and nurtured a family-like atmosphere within the strict military discipline. She was a demanding but empathetic leader who pushed them to their limits while ensuring their well-being. This leadership style, coupled with the inherent dangers of their missions, forged bonds that transcended mere military comradeship. They were sisters in arms, fighting not just for the motherland but for each other. This sisterhood manifested in countless ways. When a plane was damaged, every available hand, regardless of rank or specialty, would pitch in to help the mechanics with repairs, knowing that the next mission might depend on that very aircraft. When a crew was lost, the grief was palpable throughout the regiment, but it was quickly channeled into renewed determination and resolve to avenge their fallen comrades. They celebrated each other's victories, a particularly accurate bomb run, a successful evasion of enemy fire, with genuine joy and pride. They developed their own traditions, their own slang, their own way of navigating the unimaginable stresses of combat. They wrote letters home, sharing stories not just of battles, but of the tight-knit community they had built. They found moments of quiet joy amidst the misery, sharing a rare treat of chocolate, listening to music on a crackling radio, or simply watching the sunrise after a grueling night of sorties. These small moments of shared humanity were crucial for maintaining their sanity and spirits. The bonds forged in the smoke of battle, the danger of enemy fire, and the bitter cold of their open cockpits became the unbreakable thread that held the 588th together. It was a sisterhood born of necessity, tempered by hardship, and cemented by shared heroism. This collective strength allowed them to overcome not only the formidable enemy but also the pervasive doubts and prejudices they faced, proving that unity, courage, and mutual support were as vital to victory as bombs and bullets. Chapter 10. Mechanics and Medics. While the pilots and navigators of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment soared into legend, their success was inextricably linked to the dedication and tireless work of the women on the ground, the mechanics, armourers, and medics. These were the unsung heroes who toiled in the shadows, their hands often raw with grease and cold, ensuring that the flying coffins were ready for their nightly dance with death, and that the night witches themselves lived to fly another day. The mechanics were the backbone of the regiment. When the 588th arrived at the front, they didn't have access to sophisticated hangars or well-equipped repair facilities. Their airfields were often hastily prepared clearings, and maintenance was conducted outdoors, exposed to the elements. The Po-2s, though simple, required constant attention. Their fabric coverings could tear, their wooden frames splinter, and their engines, though robust, needed meticulous care. These women, many of whom had received only a truncated training course, became masters of their craft through sheer necessity and ingenuity. Their work was grueling and relentless. After a night of sorties, planes would land, often riddled with bullet holes, shrapnel damage, or suffering from engine strain. The mechanics would immediately swarm the aircraft, often in the pre-dawn chill, their breath fogging in the air. Armed with wrenches, rags, and buckets of oil, they would inspect every inch of the airframe, patch holes, replace damaged components, and meticulously service the engines. Time was always of the essence. A plane down for repairs meant one less aircraft in the air, one less blow against the enemy. They worked through the day, snatching sleep whenever possible, only to be ready for the next round of sorties as dusk approached. Their hands were perpetually stained with oil, their faces smudged, their bodies aching, but their resolve was unwavering. The armourers, often working alongside the mechanics, were responsible for the deadly payload. They manually loaded the bombs onto the Po-2's external racks, a physically demanding job that involved hoisting heavy explosives into place. They also prepared the flares that navigators would drop to illuminate targets, and ensured that every fuse was armed correctly. A mistake could lead to a dud bomb or, worse, an accidental detonation on the ground. Their precision and attention to detail were critical, as was their ability to work quickly and efficiently under pressure, especially during rapid turnarounds between missions. Then there were the medics and nurses. War, especially the air war, was a brutal affair, and injuries were commonplace. Frostbite, burns, shrapnel wounds, and exhaustion were constant threats to the flight crews. The medics established makeshift aid stations, often in dugouts or tents, providing immediate first aid and ongoing care. They treated severe injuries, administered pain relief, and nursed pilots and navigators back to health, often with limited supplies and under primitive conditions. But their role extended beyond physical healing. They provided crucial emotional support, listening to fears, offering comfort after a harrowing mission, and helping the women cope with the psychological toll of constant exposure to danger and loss. They were the caregivers, the listeners, and often the silent pillars of emotional strength for the regiment. The interdependency within the 588th was absolute. A pilot might be the one flying, but without the mechanic, her engine would fail. Without the armourer, her bombs would not drop. Without the medic, her frostbitten fingers might mean the end of her flying career. There was no hierarchy of importance in the face of survival. Every woman, regardless of her role, contributed directly to the regiment's effectiveness and each other's ability to survive. This deep reliance fostered an even stronger sense of community and mutual respect. The pilots and navigators understood the immense strain on their ground crews and treated them with reverence. The mechanics and medics, in turn, felt a direct stake in every successful mission, knowing their tireless efforts had allowed their sisters to return safely and strike another blow against the enemy. The constant cycle of flying, repairing, healing, and flying again formed an unbreakable chain of trust and dedication, proving that the silent, tireless work on the ground was just as vital as the daring raids in the smoke-filled sky. Chapter 11. Facing sexism and survival, when the women of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment arrived at the front lines, they faced not one, but two formidable enemies. The first was the German Wehrmacht, a brutal and technologically superior force. The second, and often more insidious, was the deeply entrenched sexism within their own military. The notion of women in combat, particularly in aviation, was a radical departure from prevailing norms, leading to widespread skepticism, mockery, and outright hostility from many of their male peers. The initial reception at the airfields was often frosty. Male pilots, ground crews, and commanding officers, accustomed to a strictly male-dominated military, found it difficult to accept these young women as equals. Jokes about petticoat pilots and skirt squadrons were common, often delivered with derision and a condescending tone. Some openly questioned their physical and emotional capabilities, suggesting that women were too frail, too emotional, or simply too unfeminine for the rigors of combat. They were often subjected to patronizing remarks about their flying skills, their courage, and their ability to withstand the harsh conditions of the front. This environment of skepticism and ridicule forced the women into a constant state of proving themselves. Every successful mission, every accurate bomb drop, every safe return after navigating through enemy fire, was a small victory not just against the Germans but against the prejudices of their own comrades. They understood that their actions, not their words, would be their most potent argument. The practical consequences of this sexism were also evident. While Marina Ruskova had secured their right to fly, the regiments often faced resource disparities. They sometimes received older, less reliable equipment, beyond the inherent limitations of the Po-2 itself, and might have been lower on the priority list for essential supplies, spare parts, or even adequate living conditions. This meant their ground crews, also predominantly women, had to be even more resourceful, patching up planes with ingenuity and sheer grit. Beyond the slights and resource limitations, the women faced immense pressure to maintain an impeccable professional demeanor. They knew that any mistake, any sign of weakness or fatigue would be amplified and used as proof that women were indeed unfit for combat. This pressure cooker environment could be exhausting, adding a significant psychological burden to the already immense stresses of war. They learned to ignore the snide comments, to carry themselves with an air of quiet determination, and to let their combat record speak for itself. Yet, despite the initial negativity, something remarkable began to happen as the Night Witches consistently delivered results. As the weeks turned into months, and the German lines reported night after night of disruptive, morale-shattering attacks from the unseen Nachthexen, grudging respect began to replace mockery. Male units who had initially laughed at the idea of women pilots soon found themselves depending on the Night Witches to soften enemy defenses or disrupt their supply lines before a major offensive. Stories of their bravery spread not just among the Germans, but within the Red Army. Tales of pilots returning with dozens of bullet holes in their planes, navigators guiding damaged aircraft home, and crews flying multiple sorties through flak-filled skies slowly chipped away at the ingrained prejudices. Commanders who had initially been skeptical began to champion their effectiveness. Male soldiers on the ground, whose lives were made easier by the Night Witches' relentless harassment of German artillery or troop concentrations, became their staunch defenders. This shift in perception was earned, not given. It was earned by the exhaustion etched on their faces after a night of 10 to 15 sorties. It was earned by the empty chairs at the mess table, marking comrades lost in the dark. It was earned by the reports of German soldiers driven to nervous breakdowns by the constant, unseen attacks. The women of the 588th didn't just survive the war, they thrived in it, carving out an indelible place in military history. They didn't just fight the enemy, they fought, and ultimately overcame, the deeply ingrained prejudices of their own society. Every night, as they took to the skies, they were not only striking blows against the Nazis, but also shattering stereotypes, one bomb run at a time, proving that courage, skill, and dedication recognized no gender. Their survival in the face of both enemy fire and societal skepticism was a testament to their extraordinary resilience and pioneering spirit. Chapter 12. Heroes of the Regiment. While the 588th Night Bomber Regiment operated as a cohesive, interdependent unit, a true sisterhood of the sky, certain individuals inevitably distinguished themselves through their extraordinary courage, skill, and leadership. These were the women whose names became synonymous with the regiment's grit and daring, embodying the very spirit of the Night Witches. Among them, Nadezhda Popova and Yevdokia Bershanskaya stand out as shining examples of the regiment's exceptional personnel. Yevdokia Bershanskaya, the unflappable commander, at the helm of the 588th, later the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, was Major Yevdokia Davidovna Bershanskaya. Born in 1913, Bershanskaya was a seasoned civilian pilot with over a decade of flying experience before the war. Her pre-war career included working as a flight instructor and squadron commander, giving her invaluable leadership and organizational skills. This experience proved crucial in molding a diverse group of patriotic volunteers into a highly effective combat unit. Barshanskaya was known for her calm and unwavering demeanor, even under the most intense pressure. She was a strict disciplinarian, demanding excellence and adherence to military protocols, which was vital for the efficiency and survival of her regiment. Yet beneath her stern exterior lay a deep concern for the well-being of her pilots and ground crews. She understood the unique psychological and physical toll of constant combat for women, and she fostered an environment of mutual support and camaraderie that became the hallmark of the 588th. She flew combat missions herself, leading by example and demonstrating her personal courage. Under her command, the regiment would go on to fly over 24,000 combat sorties, drop 23,000 tons of bombs, and produce 23 heroes of the Soviet Union. Barshanskaya's leadership was instrumental in transforming the flying coffins into a terrifyingly effective weapon, and in shattering the gender stereotypes that initially plagued her unit. For her exceptional command and bravery, she was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. She remained the commander of the regiment throughout the entire war, a testament to her steadfast leadership. Nadezhda Popova, the indomitable spirit, perhaps no name is more synonymous with the Night Witches than that of Nadezhda Nadia Vasilyevna Popova. Born in 1921, Popova was an aspiring pilot from a young age, dreaming of the skies. When the war broke out, her small hometown was overrun by German forces, and her brother was killed, fueling her intense desire for revenge. She joined the 588th as one of its most spirited and tenacious pilots. Popova quickly earned a reputation for fearlessness and an uncanny ability to navigate and bomb in the darkest nights. She often flew multiple sorties a night, sometimes as many as 18 in a single evening, returning to base only to refuel and reload before taking off again. Her plane was often riddled with bullet holes, a testament to her daring low-altitude attacks and her ability to outmaneuver enemy fire. On one occasion, she famously returned to base with her plane so shot up that it resembled Swiss cheese, but she and her navigator were unharmed. Over the course of the war, Nadezhda Popova completed an astonishing 852 combat sorties, more than almost any other pilot in the regiment. She was known for her audacity, her tactical prowess, and her unflagging humor, which helped maintain morale even in the most grim circumstances. She formed an incredibly close bond with her navigator, Yekaterina Ryabova, a testament to the profound sisterhood within the regiment. For her extraordinary bravery, skill, and sheer number of combat missions, Nadezhda Popova was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union in 1945. After the war, she continued to be a vocal advocate for her fellow veterans, ensuring their stories were not forgotten. Her indomitable spirit, relentless determination, and zest for life made her one of the most beloved and celebrated figures of the Night Witches, truly embodying the regiment's fearless heart. Beyond Barshanskaya and Popova, countless other women demonstrated incredible heroism. Marina Chechneva, who eventually commanded a squadron and flew over 800 missions, Rufina Gasheva, another hero of the Soviet Union with hundreds of sorties, and countless others whose names may not be as widely known but whose courage was no less profound. Each woman of the 588th was, in her own right, a hero, contributing to the regiment's legendary status and proving, night after night, that the courage to face danger knows no gender. Chapter 13. The Price of Bravery. The glamour often associated with aviation, even wartime aviation, quickly dissolved for the Night Witches into the harsh realities of constant danger and profound loss. The flying coffins they piloted, while tactically advantageous, were inherently vulnerable. The very essence of their daring tactics, low-altitude flying, engine cut-offs, and relentless nocturnal sorties, brought them into intimate contact with enemy defences, ensuring that the price of bravery was paid in crashes, injuries, and lives. The most immediate threat came from German anti-aircraft fire. Although the Po-2s were difficult to target, thousands of tracer rounds and exploding flak shells often filled the night sky around them. A single lucky hit could shred the fabric wings, damage the fragile wooden frame, or rupture the fuel tank. Numerous accounts describe planes returning to base looking like sieves, riddled with dozens of bullet holes. Sometimes, despite heavy damage, the resilient Po-2s and the skilled hands of their pilots managed to limp back to the airfield. Other times, the damage was catastrophic, resulting in fiery crashes. German night fighters, though often frustrated by the Po-2's slow speed, were another ever-present menace. While rare, a successful interception could be deadly. The Po-2 had no defensive armament, meaning that if a German fighter did manage to get into a firing position, the only defense was evasive maneuvering and sheer luck. Pilots became masters of sudden dives, climbs, and corkscrew turns, relying on their agility and the darkness to escape. But sometimes, evasion was not enough. Beyond direct enemy action, the perils of flying itself extracted a heavy toll. The Po-2s were small, light, and highly susceptible to strong winds and turbulent weather. Night flying, especially at low altitudes over unfamiliar and often featureless terrain, was inherently risky. Navigation errors, even minor ones, could lead to crashes into trees, power lines, or the ground. Mechanical failures, while less common due to diligent ground crew work, could also occur, leading to forced landings in hostile territory. The open cockpits, while providing excellent visibility, exposed the pilots and navigators to extreme weather conditions. In the brutal Russian winters, temperatures plummeted far below freezing. Frostbite was a constant, excruciating threat, affecting fingers on controls, toes, and exposed skin. Many pilots suffered permanent nerve damage and lost sensation in their extremities due to repeated exposure. Hypothermia was a silent killer, sapping strength and concentration. In summer, severe thunderstorms and dense fog posed equally dangerous challenges, reducing visibility to zero and disorienting pilots. The sheer physical and mental exhaustion was another significant cost. The Night Witches often flew multiple sorties per night, sometimes as many as 10 to 18, with minimal rest in between. They would land, refuel, rearm, receive new coordinates, and take off again, sometimes barely sleeping for days. This relentless operational tempo led to chronic fatigue, impacting reaction times, decision-making, and overall health. The constant adrenaline surge, followed by the deep troughs of exhaustion, wore down even the most resilient individuals. The human cost was devastating. While the exact numbers vary slightly by source, the 588th, later 46th Guards Regiment, suffered significant casualties. Out of approximately 261 personnel who served, 32 of them were killed in action or died from injuries and illnesses related to combat. This number included pilots, navigators, and ground crew. When a plane didn't return, the loss reverberated through the tight-knit sisterhood, leaving a void that was both professional and deeply personal. The empty cot in the dugout, the missing voice at the mess table, were grim reminders of the ultimate price of bravery. Those who survived often carried the scars of war, both visible and invisible. Besides frostbite and shrapnel wounds, many suffered from concussions, hearing loss, and chronic pain. The psychological wounds were perhaps even deeper. Post-traumatic stress, survivor's guilt, and the pervasive memory of lost friends. The cheerful banter and indomitable spirit often highlighted in their stories belied the profound emotional toll of witnessing constant death and destruction. Every flight was a testament to courage, a gamble against overwhelming odds. The women of the Night Witches knew the risks, but they flew anyway. Their willingness to face these dangers, to continually pay the price of bravery, cemented their legend and underscored the extraordinary depth of their commitment to their country and to each other. Chapter 14. Over the Caucasus. As the Soviet Union reeled from the initial German invasion, the summer and autumn of 1942 saw the focus of the war shift dramatically southwards. Hitler's strategic objective was now the oil-rich Caucasus region, a prize vital for fueling the Nazi war machine. The Battle of the Caucasus, a protracted and brutal campaign that stretched from July 1942 to October 1943, became one of the pivotal struggles of the Eastern Front, and the Night Witches found themselves at its very heart. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment, having proven its mettle on the Southern Front, was redeployed to the Caucasus region. The terrain was vastly different from the open steppes they had previously flown over. Here, jagged mountains, deep gorges, and unpredictable weather patterns presented new, formidable challenges. Strong winds could buffet the lightweight Po-2s, and sudden fogs could reduce visibility to zero, making low-altitude navigation even more perilous. Yet the strategic importance of the area meant the Night Witches' harassment tactics were more crucial than ever. Their primary targets shifted to support the Soviet defensive and later offensive operations. They flew countless sorties against German mountain infantry positions, supply lines snaking through narrow passes, and forward airfields from which Luftwaffe planes attempted to interdict Soviet forces. German attempts to seize the vital oil fields of Grozny and Baku were met with fierce resistance, and the Night Witches played their part by disrupting German troop movements, striking fuel depots, and denying the enemy rest. One of their most critical contributions during this period was in supporting the Soviet counteroffensive that eventually encircled the German 6th Army at Stalingrad. While the 588th was not directly involved in the Stalingrad air bridge interdiction, their operations on the broader southern front and in the Caucasus region served to tie down German resources and divert attention. By disrupting supply lines and harassing German ground forces, they indirectly contributed to the attrition that eventually led to the collapse of the Stalingrad salient. Flying over the Caucasus required even greater navigational skill and daring. The dark outlines of mountains could merge seamlessly with the night sky, creating a disorienting void. Pilots and navigators relied on their intimate knowledge of topography, their maps, and the faint glimmer of stars to guide them through the treacherous landscape. The cold at high altitudes was even more biting in the open cockpits, leading to severe frostbite for many. Yet they pressed on. Night after night, their relentless attacks a constant thorn in the side of the German advance. Beyond the Caucasus, as the tide of the war slowly but inexorably turned in the Soviet Union's favor, the 588th, redesignated the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment in February 1943, a testament to their exceptional performance, followed the retreating German forces. They participated in the liberation of the Taman Peninsula, earning their Taman designation, and then moved further west. Their missions evolved with the front lines. They flew over the Crimea, providing support during the liberation of Sevastopol. They then advanced into Belarus and Poland, targeting German defensive lines, strongholds, and retreating convoys. By 1944 and 1945, the Night Witches were flying over German territory, their bombs falling on enemy soil. They supported the Vistula-Oder offensive and the final assault on Berlin, their whispers of death now echoing in the heart of the Third Reich. Throughout these extensive campaigns, from the rugged mountains of the Caucasus to the final push into Germany, the Night Witches maintained their extraordinary operational tempo. Despite mounting losses and the constant strain of war, they continued to fly hundreds of sorties each night, a testament to their incredible endurance, their unwavering commitment, and the unbreakable bonds of sisterhood that held them together. Their presence over the Caucasus and in the subsequent campaigns solidified their reputation not just as a nuisance, but as a vital, highly effective combat unit that played a significant role in the Soviet Union's arduous march to Chapter 15. Medals, Myths and Misery. The extraordinary courage and effectiveness of the Night Witches earned them both genuine admiration and a complex, sometimes frustrating, legacy of recognition. While their daring exploits became legendary on the front lines, translating that battlefield respect into official, widespread accolades and public acclaim was often a belated and uneven process, leaving many of their sacrifices unsung for decades. On the front, the German Nachthexen moniker, initially a term of dread and superstition, eventually became a badge of honor for the Soviet women. Within the Red Army, their tireless efforts earned them the respect of male units who had once scoffed at their presence. Commanders learned to rely on their precise night strikes to soften enemy positions, and ground troops cheered their whispers in the night sky. The redesignation of the 588th to the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment in February 1943 was a significant honor, signifying their elite status and recognizing their distinguished service during the Battle of the Caucasus. This was official recognition of their combat prowess. Individual acts of heroism were indeed rewarded. Throughout the war, many members of the regiment received various Soviet military decorations. Pilots and navigators who completed a high number of sorties, displayed exceptional courage under fire, or achieved particularly impactful bombing results were often put forward for medals. The prestigious Hero of the Soviet Union title, the highest military honor, was eventually bestowed upon 23 members of the regiment. These included Commander Yevdokia Byshanskaya and renowned pilots like Nadezhda Popova, Marina Chechneva, and Rufina Gasheva. These individuals became celebrated figures, their stories sometimes highlighted in wartime propaganda. However, the path to recognition was not always straightforward. The pervasive sexism that the women battled at the outset of their service continued to cast a shadow. While their operational effectiveness was undeniable, there was often an underlying reluctance in some parts of the military hierarchy to fully acknowledge their achievements on par with their male counterparts. This was particularly true for the numerous ground crew, the mechanics, armourers and medics, whose tireless work was absolutely vital but often went unheralded, their contributions deemed less heroic than those in the cockpit. Many acts of immense courage and sacrifice by these unsung heroes simply went unrecorded in official histories. Furthermore, the nature of their missions contributed to the creation of myths that, while amplifying their mystique, sometimes obscured the grueling reality. The Silent Witch narrative, while tactically accurate in part, overshadowed the sheer physical demands, the constant cold, the exhaustion, and the technical challenges of flying Po-2s night after night. The stories of their seemingly magical ability to evade fire sometimes downplayed the intense training and the incredible skill required to perform such dangerous maneuvers. Perhaps the greatest misery for many of the Night Witches was the quiet obscurity that followed the war. With the guns silenced, the Soviet Union embarked on a massive rebuilding effort, and the narrative shifted to celebrate the broader triumphs of the Red Army, often focusing on male heroes. The women's regiments were disbanded, and most of the aviators simply returned to civilian life. Their extraordinary wartime service, having broken unprecedented barriers, often went unmentioned in their post-war lives. Some struggled with injuries, both physical and psychological, with little official support or recognition for their unique experiences. The widespread public acknowledgement that came later, through books and documentaries, was something that many veterans tragically never lived to witness. The medals they earned were hard-won, true testaments to their bravery. But alongside these symbols of honor existed the myths, both inspiring and simplifying, and the silent misery of being largely forgotten. It would take decades for historians and the wider world to fully appreciate the profound significance of the Night Witches, not just as courageous pilots but as pioneers who shattered the iron ceiling of military combat, enduring sexism and impossible odds to secure their rightful place in history.